morning and welcome to another issue, another show of Ideas at Work and Beyond. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. But first of all, there's one thing that struck me this week as I was watching the news, listening to NPR, watching CNN and MSNBP, and getting a broad background of information. BBC, you know, just getting it from everywhere.
Very eclectic now.
Thank you. I'm trying to broaden my horizon. I'm not just a Fox guy. But what really struck me was General McChrystal, who's the head military officer in Afghanistan. I religiously watched 60 Minutes, and on 60 Minutes he reported, and it's also been reported elsewhere, that he had one conversation with the commander-in-chief who sent him to Afghanistan, where we have our men and women in harm's way. He'd had one conversation with the president in over 70 days. Of course, since that time, the very adept, politically minded White House quickly got a photo op with the general and the president on Air Force One having some kind of conversation. But essentially it comes down to this. General McChrystal, who's been tasked to win the war in Afghanistan, is up against some of the cruelest people that we've seen in modern history, the Taliban. The Taliban were the host government for Al-Qaeda, an umbrella, if you will, under which Al-Qaeda was free to plan and execute the assaults on the United States that we experienced on 9/11, where 3,000 of our fellow citizens, and actually citizens of the World Trade Center was truly that. It represented populations from around the world. But 3,000 of our fellow citizens were slaughtered in the streets on 9/11, and it was a result of the work of the Taliban under the umbrella, or the work of Al-Qaeda under the umbrella provided by the Taliban. Now, there's been debate over whether we should be in Afghanistan, or whether we should be in Iraq, or whether we should be in, whether we should be in Iraq, or whether we should be in Afghanistan. And even Barack Obama said during the campaign that Afghanistan was the good war, if you will, the necessary war. So I think there's pretty much unanimity of purpose in our going to Afghanistan. However, much like General Petraeus, when he came on the scene in Iraq and asked for more troops under the guises of the surge, which was also supported by Senator McCain. And there was a lot of pushback. It was an incredibly brave move on the part of President Bush at the time, because it went against popular opinion, where people were saying, let's cut and run. Well, President Bush said, quite to the contrary, we're not going to cut and run. We're going to put in more troops, and we're going to put forth a surge, and we're going to allow General Petraeus to have this counterinsurgent policy in Iraq. And it's worked beautifully. The bloodshed, the attacks have come down dramatically, and we're slowly but surely giving that democracy to the people of Iraq. Now we look to Afghanistan, and we find a similar situation. Although it's comparing a little bit apples and oranges. Iraq seems to be a very literate country with a long history. Afghanistan, on the other hand, is tribally run and widely illiterate, and pretty much in the dark ages. But at the same time, the general who's there, General McChrystal, has asked Barack Obama, the president, for 41,000 more troops. We are up against a group called the Taliban. I did some research on the Taliban. Here are just two stories. One of which, the Taliban militants, and I don't know if you had that picture that was on the cover of Newsweek, Taliban militants arrested an acid attack on Afghanistan girls. You know, more often than not, well, generally speaking, if there's pushback against military operations, oftentimes it's a result of citizens that are concerned about, you know, unhappiness and so forth. In this case, Kabul, Afghanistan, Afghan authorities have arrested 10 Taliban militants in connection with this month's acid attack on schoolgirls, and a provincial governor said Tuesday. The militants confessed that they were paid 10,000 Pakistani rupees, about $1,200, to carry out the attacks, said the governor of Kandahar, where on November 12th the attacks occurred. The men, said high-ranking Taliban officials in Pakistan, paid them to cross the porous border to carry out the attacks. The attackers, and this is where it gets insidious. Sometimes little anecdotal parts of stories kind of hit home to me, but imagine this, if you will. The attackers used water pistols to spray acid on the girls walking to school in the southern Afghanistan city of Kandahar, blinding at least 2 of them, the U.S. military said. Kandahar government spokesman gave different figures on the numbers of girls injured, some saying 6 were burned, including 1 severely. All called the attackers enemies of education. That's the Taliban. Here's another video clip, which if we had our act together a little bit more, we could roll it. But essentially, it's a chilling moment where a 17-year-old Pakistani girl is punished in a horrific flogging by a Taliban militant for being seen with a man who is not her husband. Mobile phone footage shows the girl begging for mercies as she receives 37 lashes at the hands of her brother while 2 others hold her down. "Please stop it," she begs. Then the men completely disregarded her desperate pleas and pathetic attempts to defend herself, and the footage goes on. This is what we're up against. The Taliban, remember, are anti-women, anti-feminist. When the Taliban ruled Afghanistan, women were not even allowed outside their house, let alone allowed to go to school or hold down jobs or anything else. If the United States unilaterally pulls out of Afghanistan, it's the Taliban that will reap the benefits of that, and will have full reign in that country, and once again allow Al-Qaeda a safe haven to plan their next attack on not just the United States, but attacks that we've seen in Spain, Bali, London, and the list goes on and on. On the cover of the New York Times, I don't know, David, if you have that cover. In contrast, this just happens to strike me as I see our brave men and women that are over on the front line in Afghanistan. No, not that cover. We'll get to that later. No. That's another disaster. That cover. Those are some United States Marines. They happen to be females on the front lines fighting for your freedom and for my freedom. What their leader, General McChrystal, is asking for is more troops, much like General Petraeus did in Iraq, allow a surge, if you will, in Afghanistan to go forth to pacify the countryside and allow democracy to take root in Afghanistan. Anything short of supporting our troops at the front, I think, would be an incredible misjudgment and a borderline unpatriotic move by our President Barack Obama. So I'm very much in favor. When it comes down to those girls in the foxhole on the front line defending our freedom, or the Taliban, as illustrated on the cover of Newsweek magazine, I will always come down on the side of the United States military. That's the first thought I had. The next thought I had, a friend of mine. Yes, a friend of mine. I can call him a friend. Rudy Marconi recently announced that he is running for governor. If you have that cover of the New York Times or the News Times, it's a very colorful picture. There he is, Rudy Marconi, favorite son of Ridgefield. His family moved here, I believe, 4 generations ago. His father was a beloved contractor. I've heard stories about his father giving money to families that had fallen on hard times and being very generous, and a beloved member of the town of Ridgefield. Rudy Marconi announced this week that he'll be running for governor. He's running for the Democratic nomination for governor, and he will be on this program to discuss it. We're working a little bit on getting our studio time worked out, but he has promised us that he will appear on this program to discuss it. I know a little bit about tangling with Mr. Marconi in a political realm. There's a newspaper article there, the Ridgefield Press, circa November 2003. You'll notice, Rudy romps, Democrats celebrate. Now, this is a bit of a bitter pill for yours truly. That would be me in the picture there. Yeah, that would be me right there. There's a tradition in Ridgefield where the losing candidate in a political race has to take the long walk from their headquarters to the victorious headquarters and give a handshake and a gesture of goodwill to the candidate. So that would be yours truly, shaking Rudy Marconi's hand after getting my head handed to him in a town-wide race. So there he is, Rudy Marconi, running for governor. We wish him the best. We hope that he sides on the side of fiscal restraint when it comes to taxation and state spending, as I think he has from time to time. And it'll be very interesting to see that campaign unfold. And we look forward to having him on the show. Okay. That's all just by way of introduction. of venting, of just getting some thoughts off my chest.
Which you do very well.
I do.
Yeah.
I just tend to go on and on. How much time? Oh, look, we have 45 minutes. I could talk for more than 45 minutes, but we've got to stop.
Over under again.
I know. I'm over the 8 minutes. But we are of course joined this evening, as always, by Al Robinson.
How's it going?
Here all the time. Al Robinson is the man that I always have to explain to my more conservative friends. Who's that guy that's on your show, and what's going on with that? As I understand, you have to your more liberal left-wing friends. Is that true? Like,
yeah,
who's that Marty Heiser guy? Why should I go on the show?
Who is that guy, and why is he talking for so long? I'm like, he's fine. Don't worry about it. He doesn't bite.
All right.
He eats a lot of quail.
Yeah, quail at Helena Brentis. She's not running for mayor this time.
No.
By the way, as far as the mayor goes, I mean, Mark Bowden's a lock, who's appeared on the show as well. Wouldn't you say?
You think he's a lock?
I think he's pretty much a lock. He's up for re-election
is he really?
coming up in a couple weeks.
Didn't even know that.
Or people over politics. Mark Bowden. Have you seen this
People
line?
over politics.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't have enough time to get into that race. So,
Mark Bowden's a good
guy.
guy.
By the way, quick thing on Marconi. I just want to quickly straighten something out. He has launched an exploratory committee to see if he's running for that spot. So, a little inside baseball nonsense. He's not actually declared that he's running for governor. He's exploring the option to run for governor. There's a certain reason, but because of campaign finance stuff, that he's saying that. So, he isn't actually officially come out and say, like, I'm running for the race. I'm exploring whether or not I want to do it. And
well,
that's because of campaign finance.
That's your
stuff.
Information. I happen to have inside information from his campaign that he is actually measuring the windows for drapes in the governor's office
there you go.
in Hartford.
Well, there's a lot of people in this race, I tell you. I wonder if is Jody going to be running after all the controversies coming down our head right now?
I think, just for your information,
taxpayers' dollars for polling.
Jody Rell is the most popular sitting governor in the United States right now. She is beloved by not only viewers of this program, but residents of Connecticut statewide. And if she should decide to continue to be a public servant in the state of Connecticut, she will be overwhelmingly reelected, and I would consider it, it a proud thing to live in this state with Jody Rell as governor.
Well, I think of Jody Rell. This is Jody Rell like this, like being the puppet, and here's Lisa Moody going like this, controlling everything. Oh, you don't know about Lisa Moody?
No, give me what's up with Lisa Moody.
Well, she's the person really running the state. But again, we don't even have close to enough time to talk about Lisa Moody. You really do your homework about Lisa Moody. I have never heard of Lisa Moody.
I've never heard of Lisa Moody.
You gotta be kidding me.
I don't know who Lisa Moody. Who is he? Like Karl Rove to Bush is Lisa Moody to Jody Rell.
Big time. I asked Chris Healy about her.
All right, we'll have to.
They're good friends.
All I know is I have seen Jody Rell. I have seen her in action.
You've seen her?
I have absolutely seen her. Not only
actually in her office working.
I've seen her in her office working. I have seen her among her fellow citizens. I have seen her doing a wonderful job being the governor of this state, and I think she'd be overwhelmingly reelected. Do you know when I see Jody Rell, she offers her cheek, and I get to kiss her cheek?
Well, I'm not going down that road.
Well, I think it's something.
We're getting a little blue here.
Okay, now. There's another aspiring politician who is not, who is here today, and that is Rob Merkel. Rob.
Marty.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for putting up with the long, introduction.
Very informative.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're here. Now, Rob, I had a chance to meet the other day. I've seen him at various functions, and you are running for the congressional seat presently occupied by Jim Himes.
That's correct.
Okay, for our vast viewing audience, can you just give us some reasons why you're running and why you think they should vote for you?
Well, basic reason why I'm running is my wife told me to stop yelling at the television. She said, you give yourself a heart attack or you can go change something about it. What I've seen the last year, I've never wanted to be a politician, Marty. I've always considered myself a businessman. And when I see what's happening in D.C. with the government completely outside of the bounds of what our founding fathers intended, taxes out of control and spending out of control, I think we need someone that has the courage to actually rein that in. And I don't think Jim Himes is that guy. I mean, just look at his record.
Okay, now, what is your background? Where are you from? Are you married? What makes you think that you're prepared to take on this responsibility? Oh, and before you answer, we have Rob's email and website address up there, and also if you'd like to ask some questions or join in, or if you disagree with Al Robinson, by all means call in. The phone number is 792-4101, 792-4101, and please call in. But go ahead.
Well, my mother's family is from New Canaan. I've been in Connecticut for most of the last 17 years. My wife and I live in Norwalk right now. We have 2 children. In fact, we just had our second daughter about 8 weeks ago.
Oh, so, congratulations.
Thank you. I have a small business in Norwalk. I have an executive search firm.
Okay.
We place candidates in the capital markets, so we work with hedge funds, investment banks, mostly buy side. And prior to that, my background was in the capital markets. I did securitization programs, bought and sold distressed debt. So I understand the technology behind the subprime crisis and where we went wrong and how to fix it. You know, I couldn't sit by and watch this country get sold down the river without standing up and trying to do something about it. So here I am.
You know, it's interesting. We had a different economist who was on this program, Nick Perna. He's actually on the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. He's appeared on Fox. He's appeared on CNN and other places. And we went through step by step the subprime crisis. What exactly, in layman's terms, happened? And how can we get ourselves out of this mess, and what do we need to do going forward to make sure it doesn't happen again if you were elected to Congress?
Well, there's a couple things that happened. First off, is you got to trace this all the way back to the Carter administration with the Community Reinvestment Act. There was basically a government mandate for banks to expand their lending practices, and to do so they had to relax their credit criteria.
Okay.
So we ended up getting a lot of people into homes that couldn't necessarily afford them, and that was exacerbated during the Clinton era. And when the securitization technology was applied to it, it was a concept of basically taking the risk and putting it off balance sheet so that the losses really weren't incurred by the companies that were sponsoring this. Couple that with the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, so that the investment banks and the commercial banks could now engage in these investment activities. You get companies like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns getting into things that they previously were not able to do before.
Okay. Caller, you on the air?
Hi, Marty. I'd like to ask our guest here. President Obama said yesterday or today that the U.S. is considering opening up a dialogue with Al-Qaeda. You heard that?
No, but if you are a highly educated caller say that that's the case, we can, at least for discussion purposes, move forward. He's saying you're saying he's interested. I mean, he did when he was first elected president. His first interview was with Al Jazeera, and then the first overseas trip he went to was in Cairo, where he gave a speech, sort of welcoming with open arms a dialogue with the Islamic countries. Is that continuation of that?
I didn't hear it directly, but I heard on the news that he made a comment. What do you think of that? I mean, did we engage in dialogue with the Japanese and with the Nazis in 1941?
Okay.
I don't know if it's a good idea. What does the candidate think of that? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
We did do dialogue with the Chinese. Nixon went over there and talked to the Chinese. We did do dialogue with the Russians. We did do the dialogue with Libya. I mean, But I'm sorry.
No, it's all about you. I mean, there's an Israeli concept with the idea that you can only make peace with your enemies. And so Obama's, I guess, policy is to be more open-minded and seek out diplomatic ties with governments where we might not otherwise have done that in the past.
Again, President Nixon was the first president to meet the Chinese government, and during the height of the communist movement, and that was a big event that happened.
Yeah, but that was in essence to sidetrack the Soviet Union, which was the real enemy, and sort of divide your enemy.
Chinese wasn't a big thing back then?
No, but as the saying goes, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. And communist China was, with Mao Zedong, was very much against the Soviet Union. And so the saddling up to China really ticked off the Kremlin. Hold on one second. Now for the... Caller, you're on the air. Sorry about that. I have to have my children here to run the computer. Well, what do you think about that? International policies. I mean, Obama seems to be taking a more open approach, a less belligerent approach. I don't know if he's, seeking out discussions with Al-Qaeda, but what's your view on that?
Well, first of all, I want to say I have a brother in Afghanistan right now.
Really?
And so this is personal for me. Where I have issue with the current administration is their deviation from the American exceptionalism principle, in that America is an exceptional country, and we basically created one of the highest standards of living in the world because of our exceptionalism. But to abdicate our border security and our sovereignty to a world court or to a global governing power, that to me is not American.
Okay. Caller, you're on the air? Are you there, caller?
Yes, hello?
Yes, please, you're on the air. What's your thought?
Yeah, I was just trying to comment on, someone said Helena Branches wasn't running this year again.
Well, what is the story? Is Helena running or not?
I'm just saying it's too bad because we could use a good mayor. And I think she's great.
Okay, have you ever been over to her restaurant over there by the...
I've been to her restaurant. I've been with her. I know her very well.
Well, I think you should go over there and order a meal and talk to Helena and say, Helena, we need you in City Hall, and won't you please run again?
Oh, I do. Every time I see her.
And what does she say?
I think she's great.
And what does she say?
Actually, I don't know if she even, wants to bother with it, but I still encourage her to do it. I think she's great.
Well, Helena,
I think she would make a great mayor.
Helena,
I'm sorry, I'm not happy. I haven't been actually happy with the one we have and the ones before him, and I think, not because she's a female, but I think she would do good for this city.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. We like Helena quite a bit, and when he's talking about eating quail, that's where we eat quail, is over at Helena Brentis. Wonderful restaurant. What's it called?
Great restaurant, the Atlantic.
The Atlantic. Well, of course, we can't make commercial endorsements because this is public access television.
Right.
But hypothetically, if I wanted some quail and a Coors, I'd go to Helena.
I think I would love to see her go through and go through them.
Okay.
Make them come true for everybody.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Helena Obrentis' cousin checking in, which is a good thing. I'm sorry, we interrupted. You were talking about,
Yes.
international policy, because really in the Congress, I mean, people sometimes say it's 350 Secretary of States. That's not the case. But you'd have to, bring your judgment to bear on some of this.
Well, a lot of what the administration is doing has a direct bearing on national security. Take our energy policy, for instance, our monetary policy. And, when the administration goes on an apology tour multiple times, it does not put us in the world stage in a position of strength. And you look at the times when we negotiate with Russia and China, we were negotiating from a position of strength, not groveling. And I think at this point, if it's indeed true that we're approaching the Taliban, I think we need to make sure that we are in a secure position, and I don't think we're there now.
I would really question the caller. The Taliban. I wouldn't even go down that road.
That was a big if. Yeah, exactly. Big if.
You don't want that up on YouTube.
No.
Okay, all right. Okay, but, I agree. You can't take what the caller says, but would you agree that Barack Obama is generally, let's take Iran, for example, whereas President Bush would not sit down and negotiate with Iran, Barack Obama and his administration seems more open to doing that. Which
I don't think they're open to doing that, especially with the in light of the new nuclear facility. I think they're pushing for tougher sanctions, and they're asking Russia to get on board. Russia is the big problem in terms of getting tougher sanctions on Iran, because they do a lot of oil exports. Iran, China. They're the real problems. I wouldn't necessarily try to sit down and talk with the Iranians. You sit down and really put some pressure on the people who are doing business with this regime that is doing really bad things and threatening the entire Middle East. I mean, look at Iran. They're a real pain in the butt. But look at the people who are taking exports imports from Iran. Again, the Russians and the Chinese. Basically giving blood money to allow these people to do this stuff. There's only so much the United States can do in terms of sanctions. If these other superpowers don't get on board, there's not much you can do. The whole thing with diplomacy is a really, really complex matter. It's not really simple and cut dry with countries, so it's really, really complex. So I think people have to be really careful when throwing their opinions when it comes to diplomacy, because you're dealing with different countries, and not only different countries, but other countries that deal with these countries.
Okay,
again, with the case in Iran, they've been getting away with a lot of stuff they've been getting away with, not because of, we have sanctions on them already, but without the Russians, and again, the Chinese getting on board and saying, hey, look, you know, cut the stuff out or else we're not going to buy your oil, it's not much you can do. They can just thumb their nose at UN because, you know, they're exporting their oil. They're making their cash.
Okay, let me just for discussion purpose, let's do a compare and contrast. Compare the international diplomacy, if you will, of Ronald Reagan. I mean, I happen to be, you know, politically conscious. When Jimmy Carter was in office, our embassy was taken hostage for something like, you know, 380 days or whatever it was. Ronald Reagan, as candidate for president, was asked what he would do with Iran, and his quote was, "I would not negotiate with those barbarians." Well, guess what? The day that Ronald Reagan was inaugurated into the White House, by golly, those hostages were on a plane coming back. Okay, now, generally speaking, just let me...
It was a few days later, I mean.
I'm just telling you, they didn't want to have anything. They didn't want to have anything to do, but generally speaking, the campaign that was fought a year ago, the policy was that George Bush was, too bombastic, too quick to use military force and what have you, and Barack Obama would be a kinder, gentler foreign policy. And I guess what we're asking, is that the right approach to take?
Well, again, you're dealing with diplomacy. That's a very complex subject. And when you talk about Jimmy Carter, I think about the ability for that particular president to get the Israelis and the Egyptians to come together on the table and talk about some peace. Remember, during that time, those two people were
no, he got Sadat and Begin together,
and
they got that settled, and that's to his credit. Lately, he hasn't been so good, especially with racism. We're going to take a break here. We're going to be joined by Matt Grimes, just because he's a really smart guy. And he looks good in a blue blazer, so he'll be joining us talking about politics. And we'll be back right after this short break with Rob Merkel, running for the United States Congress.
4th District.
4th District. And his website is going to be on the screen as well. If you have questions for Rob, please call in. Our studio line, again, it's right there somewhere.
792-4101.
That's right, and we'll be right back.
State, there are no extras, no fluff, no frills, no free lunch, no second helpings, no streets paved with gold, no promise, no certainty. In this state, life is a bitter struggle to survive with the least. It's home to 1 out of every 11 families in America. It's home to 1 out of every 6 children in America. It's home to more than 32 million people. It's the state of American poverty. And if you were poor, you'd be home by now.
Why is it you two have so much trouble communicating?
I don't like the way he talks to me. He doesn't have to use that kind of language.
All I said was that you had a big osteo fight. Oh, okay, well, what about the secrets you kept from me?
Oh, so I didn't tell you about my drug allergies. Big deal.
That could have been nasty.
Ooh. Okay. So, how come I always have to go to your place?
I'd be happy to come to you, Judith. I can't fit the x-ray machine in my car. How's your shoulder doing, anyway?
Fine.
Yeah?
I worked up to 3-pound dumbbells yesterday.
Really? Huh. Just 3 weeks after surgery. That's pretty good.
Yeah?
Communication is the best medicine. A message from the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons.
Well, now we're getting somewhere. Group hug.
Welcome back to Ideas at Work and Beyond. The grand mix here at the round table has been joined by Matt Grimes, who basically knows everything about all the local races. But we really want to focus on Rob Merkel. Rob's running for United States Congress. And Rob, what are your thoughts on health care and the result in tax increases to help fund that? And what is your idea?
Well, thanks, Marty. First of all, the idea that the government is going to be a more efficient deliverer of health care than the private sector is a fallacy. I mean, you look at Medicare, Medicaid, they're basically bankrupt with trillions of dollars of unfunded liabilities. Government bureaucracy is known for its inefficiency and waste. And to make the claim that a government-sponsored program is going to foster competition doesn't work from an economic perspective. Government does not have a profit motive. They have shown us they're very good at operating at a deficit, and I think we're up to $1.4 trillion deficit this year, which is more than triple the previous record. And they have the ability to tax. So a government option will necessarily drive out the private sector. What I've done is put forth a plan that was published a couple weeks ago in the Ridgefield magazine that lays out a purely private option solution to our problems. Number one is get rid of the restriction on states, on insurance companies competing across state lines. This is a government-created near monopoly that insurance companies enjoy, and it allows them to not only dictate terms to patients in terms of costs and pre-existing condition exclusions, but also to put the hammer on doctors. Because doctors have three choices. They can either go all Medicare and Medicaid patients and submit their bills to the government, which they don't make any money. They can go part Medicare, Medicaid, and part private insurance, or they can go all private insurance. I mean, all no insurance, where they're catering just to the wealthy people that can pay for services without having any insurance whatsoever. So they're looking for relief as well. Make insurance portable. Let people take it with them. Eliminate or work on tort reform. What people don't realize is approximately 30% of the medical procedures in this country that are practiced are defensive medicine. So you take that number in drugs, in procedures, and in doctors' time, and you've got a huge amount of resources that could be devoted elsewhere. Now let's assume the 47 million people that are uncovered that the government has been touting as the problem is actually a real number. That's about 15% of the U.S. population. So if you take roughly 30% of our resources and apply it to 15% of our population, you have an oversupply. That will also lower costs. Take a look at Texas. They capped medical malpractice awards. I don't know the exact number. I think it's about $750,000. And it had the immediate effect within a year of dropping medical malpractice insurance premiums by over 25%. That's a cost that goes directly to the bottom line. Now, all of these things can be implemented with zero government involvement and no new taxes. What people fail to realize is when the administration says, and Nancy Pelosi says, we're going to pay for this program out of cost savings from Medicare. Oh, and by the way, there's going to be a small tax on the wealthy. That small tax on the wealthy is going to hit Fairfield County number 2 out of all the districts in the country because we have such a high concentration of wealthy individuals. Now what that translates into is in this district we have 17 towns, and every year it's going to cost Fairfield County $1.5 billion in additional tax revenue. to pay for this plan. That's about 3% of the money that the administration wants to raise on paper. The CBO estimates, the Congressional Budget Office, actually say that this plan is going to cost significantly more than what the administration and Congress are saying it's going to cost. So to even consider going down this path, I think is ludicrous.
Explain briefly and then give us your views on cap and trade.
First of all, it doesn't work.
Give us just a broad overview of what we're talking about with that.
What cap and trade is basically is a huge tax. And what it's going to do for us here is every time you turn on the light, every time you start your car, every time you buy food, clothes, you're going to be paying more money. What cap and trade is essentially doing is putting a tax on our traditional method of producing energy. And the idea is it's going to incentivize us to move to alternative energies. So the government is arbitrarily putting a cap on the amount of carbon emissions that industries in the United States can emit. This was tried in Europe, and it didn't work. What ended up happening was utility costs went up significantly. Everything that involves electricity got more expensive, roughly 30–40%. Utility companies made billions of dollars trading these carbon credits. Because the cost to produce went up, manufacturing jobs were lost. So manufacturing moved from the EU to India and China and lesser developed parts of the world where they don't have environmental restraints. And at the end of the day, carbon emissions actually went up. So what this is basically a tax, plain and simple, and it's being laid on the American people at a time when we need it the least. Our economy is fragile. The real unemployment rate is closer to 19% because the numbers that the government is reporting right now are only new claims and people that are currently receiving unemployment benefits. It doesn't count the people that are underemployed, that are taking 2 and 3 part-time jobs to try to make their mortgage. It doesn't count the people that have given up. Some have tried to go back to school, some of them just aren't looking, and they're afraid for what's coming next. So the real unemployment number is enormous, and I see it every day in my business.
Matt, you are a political consultant. As you look at Congressman Himes in that 4th Congressional District, do you see him as vulnerable coming a year from now?
Well, I think so. I mean, you look at the margin that Jim won by. I mean, it's not an insignificant thing to take down a 20-year incumbent the way he did. But when you look at the margin he won by, I mean, I don't see him as doing something. I mean, if I can tell you, if I was a congressman that won with 50.5% of the vote, whatever it did,
is that what it was?
I think it was something like that.
Do you know those numbers?
I think it was actually, I don't think he got the majority.
He didn't clear 50?
No.
Okay, but the point is I'd be doing everything I could to make that 50-60 in very short order. Yeah. And I don't think Jim Himes has done that. I mean, I don't live in the district, but I think he's moved farther to the left. It's a very centrist district, as many people know, as Chris Shays was able to toe the line for many years. If I was Jim Himes, I'd be figuring out what I could do to get part of the Blue Dog Coalition, which is the fiscally conservative group of Democrats, and doing that. And I don't see him done that. I think he's moved further to the left since he's been in Congress. I think he ran as a moderate. I think he campaigned as a moderate. And I think people that fed up with a Republican mainstream nationally voted for him as a moderate. And I think the voters of the district are a lot more far to the center than Congressman Himes is. That's just my humble opinion. I live in the 5th.
Al, we have a bet, don't we, on Jim Himes being reelected? If we don't, we should.
We can do another bet if you like
so
to.
Let's
not do it tonight.
Because you seem to be fairly confident. I think someone like Mr. Merkel here could catch fire.
Well, before we jump into that, I just want to touch base with you real quick. Now, you're a Republican running for the force.
Yes.
You have another person that we had on this show a couple of weeks ago, State Senator Dan DiBisello.
My man.
So we have 2 Republicans right now running for that nomination. So why don't you tell the viewing audience, we have 4, why don't you tell the viewing audience why you feel you're better than Dan DiBisello or the other candidates running for the nomination?
Certainly. Here's why. I mean, nothing against Dan or the other candidates. These are all great guys. But I think what's called for right now is someone who's not a politician. I have capital markets background, so I know the mess that we're in. I also am a small businessman. I know firsthand the challenges that we're facing with healthcare, with government taxation, with bureaucracy. People don't realize that the United States has the highest tax structure in the world with respect to our corporate earnings. That puts us at a significant disadvantage against China, India, Europe, and Asia. We have a hard time competing against that. From my perspective, I have the ability to go in and not want to have a political career for the rest of my life, so I can make the hard decisions up front. And we need to make some tough calls. We need to make them now.
Okay.
Caller, you on the air? Caller, are you there? Going once. Go ahead.
Yes, I am. How are you?
Good, good. What's your thought?
My thought is, it sounds like Rob Merkel's a real conservative. Something we need in the U.S. Congress.
I agree. Are you going to vote for him?
I would vote for him.
All right, well, that's great. Do you look at his website? We'll show it on the screen again, and, you know, tap onto that and get a little bit more involved. That's great.
Thank you very much.
Let me ask you another quick question here.
Sure.
Republicans have been shrinking at least since, I think, 2006 in terms of the numbers of individuals in the House of Representatives. Mm-hmm. Let's say you do, I'm not going to say if you win or not, but let's play devil's advocate. Let me just say that, you know, why would somebody want to vote for a Republican to go to the House of Representatives, seeing that you're such a minority right now? You really don't have control over the agenda in terms of bringing bills to the floor, getting stuff voted. Can you explain to me why somebody would want to vote for a Republican to go into the House of Representatives?
What he's saying is, why don't we just embrace a Democrat-controlled dictatorship in this country where there's no separation of state or alternate views proposed? I think that's what he's saying.
Well, let me ask, have you ever played sports?
Oh, of course.
You ever been down in the fourth quarter?
Yeah.
Did you ever give up?
No, I have not.
Well, I look at my two daughters, and I look at what this country is doing, and my father used to quote a phrase all the time. It said, all it takes for evil to succeed in the world is for good men to do nothing. And what I see in the direction this country is going, it's unsustainable. And I feel I have the ability to do something about it. So if I arbitrarily step back and say, you know what, the Democrats are in control, I can't do anything, and every other guy like me has that same thought, we'll never take this country back. I think what's happening now is the United States has woken up. As much as this administration and Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid have been damaging this country internally, I think it's had a very galvanizing effect for the conservative movement and the Republican Party. And people are starting to realize, you know what, it does matter that I get involved. We have not had a representative democracy for years in this country, and this is a chance for us to get that back.
Matt, you have some thoughts on some of the local elections. Now, this is my thought. I think 2010 is shaping up to be a big year for the Republicans. Al Robinson, as you might suspect, disagrees with that. What do you see happening on a local level in some of these races?
In 2009 or in 2000?
I'm talking about 2009, and then as it rolls forward into 2010, what do you see the effect?
Well, certainly I'm a supporter of Dan DiBasella for the Senate. I have every confidence for the United States Congress. I have every confidence that Senator DiBasella is going to be the Republican nominee, and the quicker he gets that nomination, I think that he's going to go on to give Jim Himes a very competitive race. We're a year out. I'm not sure that I'd be out to predict the winner at this point.
Let me just take issue with you on that, because what we're talking about is a Republican primary, and that's a pretty isolated group of voters that are actually.
If we're sure there's going to be a primary.
Oh, you don't think there's going to be a primary?
There may not.
What about Mr. down in the fourth quarter here sitting right next to you? He played football at Notre Dame. He seems like he's been through a few battles. I think he's in for the long haul.
Convention, primary, whatever, I have every confidence that Senator DiBasella is going to be the Republican nominee and is going to go on to give Congressman Himes a very competitive race.
For the purposes of discussion, go ahead.
Locally, what do we got? We got several towns in the greater Danbury area, only one of which gives their chief executive a 4-year term. Happens to be the great town of Ridgefield, allows Rudy Marconi to do what he's doing.
Well, essentially, with Mr. Marconi at the helm, we're really one step away from a monarchy. I mean, look at him on the cover of this paper. I mean, you know.
I heard. That's what I asked her. I said jokingly. I mean, I love her to death, and she disagrees with me. But Selectman Masters in measuring the drapes in the first Selectman's office this past week, or I'm not sure.
She could be, but Rudy Marconi would have to move to Hartford for any of that to happen. But anyways, what are your thoughts on some local races?
Which town you want to start with? Pick a town.
Well, Bethel. We've been
Great town of
dabbling
Bethel, okay.
into that cesspool of dysfunction. And what are your
I think
we're trying to make heads or tails of it. We're not
I think that the first selectman race in Bethel is Mr. Knickerbocker's to lose. I served alongside Matt as a fellow Board of Ed chairman for several years. He and I had spiritual disagreements. I was a conservative Republican. Matt's a liberal Democrat. But I look at the three-man race. I mean, Bob Burke, who I served as an administrative assistant to, his second selectman, Paul Zatkowski, who I'm very close with, Larry Krabus, who I don't know that well, but I have a tremendous amount of respect for. I look at those three candidates and I say, in a three-way race, Matt Knickerbocker is the only candidate I see right now that can clear 50% of the vote.
Now, do you feel that Bob Burke is going to pull one of these Ralph Nader effects and split the Republican vote enough to give Matt the votes he needs to win?
Well, I don't think having two Republican candidates in the race helps. And I think that that puts Matt on the edge. I mean, I think that technically Matt could win right now by just getting what Dave Olson got last time, which was about 43% of the vote in a three-way race. If he just polls what Dave Olson polled last time, and Bob takes one out of every three Krabus voters, Matt wins with only 43% of the vote. So I think it's his to lose, quite frankly, at this stage of the game. Here on October 8th, I think it's Matt Knickerbocker's race to lose. I wish all three candidates luck. I think they're all three fine gentlemen. But that's where I handicap Bethel right now. Easily leans Democratic.
How much do you think the personal problems with the current first selectman has caused in terms of him losing votes or him losing support?
You know,
do you think if the court case never came out, we still have the situation here where the Republicans would just
I don't know. Separate that issue. When you have
you think obviously that was a factor in the
it does.
primary.
Any time that you have a chief executive getting arrested, it's not a good thing, except for maybe Buddy Cianci out in Providence, who won his third term from jail. But I mean, when you boil it down, though, the fact is that we had a popular Republican first selectman in Bob Burke, a popular Republican second selectman in Zatkowski, and everybody's saying, why aren't these two guys who served for 4 years and turned the ship around running together? Because of personality conflicts. Come on, guys, work together. That's what I think was so unusual about this primary, regardless of Mr. Burke's personal problems or an arrest or the Republican Town Committee or whatever. I mean, yes, Al, to answer your question, certainly that does have an effect. But anytime, I mean, even if that weren't the case and you had two Republican candidates running, the winner and the loser of the primary, I think that bodes well for a Democratic nominee in a year like this.
Give us another town. What do you have? Brookfield?
Brookfield, okay.
Yes.
We've got three candidates there. Brookfield is a unique town. It's a red town in a blue state. We lost, the Republican candidate lost to an independent by 10 votes 2 years ago on the lowest turnout in town history, aided by the fact that there was no Democrat candidate, lowest turnout in 38 years. But I think this year the Republicans have a polished game. It's interesting that the Democratic candidate is a former Republican. The independent candidate is a former Republican, all three of which were staunch supporters of Jerry Murphy for many years during his years as first selectman. Right now, I would say that I mean, I'm biased, of course, but I would say Mr. Tinsley, the Republican nominee, has a slight edge going into it. Where I said that Matt Knickerbocker could be the only candidate that clears 50% in Bethel, I would say Bill Tinsley is the only candidate that can clear 50% in Bethel. Is it a slam dunk election for Bill Tinsley? No, I don't think so today. I think that he's going to be the front runner, and I think that it'll be a competitive race in the end in Brookfield. It's not going to be a quiet one. People realized after Bob Silvaggi, who's been a disaster for that town, won by 10 votes 2 years ago, I think they realized their vote counts.
In Danbury, Mayor Bowden, it's his world. We just live in it here in Danbury.
Well, I mean, I haven't seen, here's what I haven't seen in Danbury. I haven't seen any game changer that would do anything significant to move any of the parties. I see this as being the same election that we've seen in the last few years. A Democrat really running an uphill battle against a very well-funded, a very personally popular mayor, regardless.
And very organized. His campaign
very much so. I mean,
like a sewing machine.
I mean, we're a month out to the election. I have yet to see a game changer in Danbury that would move any of the parties from where they've been the last 3 or 4 elections.
I think historically, in terms of Danbury, that's what it's always been. In the history of Danbury, I think there's only been 3 incumbent mayors that have lost re-election.
One of which was under indictment.
Dyer, Sarr, and Mark Bowden's father, Don Bowden.
Right, yeah.
So it's, you know, when you're dealing with Danbury loved their incumbents. And if you look at the history of the Common Council since, I think, 2003, incumbents really haven't lost their lost their seats. So it's you know, steady habits
And somebody says Boughton's a Republican mayor that could win in a Democrat town. Well, this really isn't a Democrat town. 1 in every 2 voters is unaffiliated in this city, and they get very comfortable with their incumbents unless they do something very damaging. But as I said, I have yet to see a game changer in this race that moves any of the parties from where they've been in the last few elections. There's a month to go. A lot can happen, but I see that happening. I see the council probably falling where it is right now, 2-to-1 Republican majority. Where those seats are, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be 7 at-large Republicans or 1 or 2 at-large Democrats, or one of the wards might flip or something like that.
I can tell you,
but I would see a 14-to-7 split. I think it's about right.
I can slightly disagree a little bit, just knowing I follow Danbury politics a lot. I can tell you that the first ward is really up for grabs. There's 2 Democrats who are really knocking doors, pounding hard, and there's a lot of concern that the Republicans might lose at least 1 seat there. I think a big mistake from one of the Republicans also is that they took a very popular Common Council candidate at large in Jack Knapp, who was running at the at-large ticket, moved him over to the 3rd ward, where you already had a very powerful person who was the Common Council president, Joe Cabo, there.
You're rearranging the deck chairs.
Rearranging the deck chairs, and now you took somebody who had a solid chance of getting the at-large seat, put him in the 3rd ward, where you didn't really need a solid person, and you're leaving that at-large spot wide open for maybe a Democrat.
I would tend to agree. You're going to have some switches, and I actually think that Mr. Levy was in a good position last time. I don't see him as in a good ballot position this time against Bobby Arconte. I think that does some damage to him a little bit. But you know, a lot can happen. But I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, will the Republicans retain a majority on the council? Yes, it's just a question.
Is Mayor Boughton going to get reelected?
As of today, with a month out, absolutely.
It's Mayor Boughton's town we just live in. Is that accurate?
Sure.
Thank you. What do you think in Ridgefield? Anything exciting or dynamic going on in that sleepy little town?
Ridgefield, I'm actually quite embarrassed for Ridgefield, and I'll tell you why. Because they did something that was a very bad thing in their charter revision a few years ago that does very damaging to local races. And when you put a 4-year term in for a chief executive, it throws the voter turnout into the basement. In the off year, you'll be lucky to get a 20% voter turnout in this town this year. And then in your year where you do elect the first selectman, your turnout will be significantly lower. Because when you have a 2-year chief executive, voters tend to be more educated. Voters tend to know who the chief executive is, whether it's a mayor or a first selectman. Whereas if you go 4 years without voting, and then your voter turnout depresses overall. I have yet to see an example in this state that put a 4-year term in for a chief executive where it didn't send the voter turnout into the basement in the off year, and then made it even significantly lower than it had been when the chief executive's up for election.
Absolutely.
So
Gosh, man, I'm feeling vaguely scolded by you here on local television.
I mean, who wants Board of Finance being their top race on the ballot, Marty?
Well, Board of Finance is a very important race, and they're 4-year terms, because Board of Finance needs to be long-sighted and
well, when 4 out of 5 of your voters are staying home, which you're going to have in Ridgefield this year, I think that's a very bad thing. Newtown is another one I want to point out.
Yes,
Herb Rosenthal, a long-time first selectman at Newtown, lost by...
but just not to interrupt. But your level of detail and knowledge about these local races and how they break down is just very impressive. But anyways, I just wanted you to take a breath now. Please continue with breaking down Newtown.
Great town in Newtown. Herb Rosenthal was the first selectman for about 10 years. Did a fabulous job for the town. Son of a former first selectman, Jack Rosenthal. He ran against what people consider, I mean, Joe Borst, who's the current first selectman, is 83 years old, but what people didn't realize about Joe was longtime legislative council member, longtime selectman, longtime Board of Finance member. That was a horse race. Joe also had the endorsement of the Independent Party in Newtown, which is controlled by Dr. Fand in Bethel and Danbury and Newtown and a few other sprinklings of districts. So that was how they were able to take down Herb. Now, this time the independent candidate is not endorsing the Republican candidate. Joe had kept his pledge to serve only 1 term. And you've got a Democratic candidate, Gary Fetzer, who lost the Democratic primary to Herb in 1997 for first selectman, and has spent the last few years teaching campaign strategies down in Fairfield at Sacred Heart University. I think as Newtown's is almost as a Republican town as Brookfield is, I think that it's Gary Fetzer's race to lose in Newtown. You've got him up against a very unknown Republican candidate, a very dynamic independent candidate who I believe will attract 15 to 20% of the vote in Newtown, and I think it's I think Gary can win, and do I think Gary can clear 50? Probably not, but I think he can win the election. And I wouldn't be surprised if you actually saw Gary Fetzer as a first selectman with 2 Republicans on the Board of Selectmen. I wouldn't be surprised at all.
I agree with that. Real quick, why don't we shoot over to New Fairfield? We got some craziness going on down there. So give me your opinion on that race.
To a certain extent, but I think that with the craziness that's gone there, I presume you're referring to the Board of Ed emails in recent days.
No, we got the Board of Ed emails.
Comments.
We got a Republican running on a Democratic ticket.
But you know what? John Hodges struck a note in New Fairfield where he's the Teflon first selectman.
Yeah.
Everybody seems to like John, even if they disagree with him. I mean, he's just a genuinely nice man. He works very hard. When you call his office, you get constituent service. When you ask him something, you may disagree with him, but he'll listen to you. I've never seen anybody say that I called up town hall and no one listened to me. I think John Hodge wins re-election by a wide margin. In New Fairfield, whatever happens down ballot remains to be seen, but John is the man to beat.
Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Grimes. I have his email address and his cell phone number, so from time to time he comes in and he gives us all we ever wanted to know and a little bit more about local races in the surrounding area. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rob, I wanted you to give you the last minute and a half just to look into the camera and if you would make your final appeal to the voters why, unlike this political savant next to you, you feel like you not only having a chance and why you would like to be in the U.S. Congress instead of Jim Himes.
Well, here's my thought, and I've been hearing this from people I've been talking to for the last couple of months. People in this country, and particularly in this district, they don't trust politicians. Politicians are the ones that got us in this mess. And, you know, Obama ran on change. Jim Himes rode his coattails on change. And, you know, Jim Himes has voted 96% of the time, approximately, to back Nancy Pelosi. And, you know, anytime that you get that dynamic in Congress, it's not good for the American people. So my background, I create jobs. I feel the pain of the average people in this district. And I've got the guts to stand up and actually make something happen. I'm not a politician. I'm not a party guy. And I think that makes the regulars nervous.
Like Matt.
Like Matt.
Yeah.
You know, they don't want to admit that.
He seems apprehensive.
I mean, look, if you look at it this way, I mean, you can take the gloves off for a second. The Republican Party has lost a number of seats in the last 6 years. Why? Because they haven't got it right. Because we've been doing the old line party politics, the disaffected, you know, we know what's best and we're going to do it our way. You say the party of no, but we need to move forward, and I'm the guy.
Rob, thank you very much for coming in. I appreciate it. Next time I want to get into the story about how you walked on the Notre Dame football team, much like the movie Rudy.
Absolutely.
Matt Grimes, thank you
Thank
again.
you, Marty.
And we'll do another one of these shows, and you'll have the whole
Marty.
show. And of course, Al Robinson, promoting a kind of monolithic Soviet-type government where the Democrats are in charge, because otherwise, how are you going to move bills around unless you're a Democrat? Thanks for joining us. We've looked at everything from the Taliban to Rudy Marconi to local races to this congressional candidate, Rob Merkel. Join us again on Ideas at Work and Beyond. We're not sure what's coming on next week, but we will return. Like MacArthur says, I shall return. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.